Welcome to cooking cheap, easy, and tasty meals. Okay, today I'm going to make a pie crust, or actually a couple of pie crust. But this recipe gives you two pie crusts. I may use both of them because I may make a covered pie. I haven't decided. Starts with 2.5 cups of flour. Now, like in most things involving flour, you'd probably be better off weighing this rather than using cup measurements. But I'm going to use cup measurements, and if you adjust the water accordingly, that's fine. But flour is going to be varied by brand and what the weather's like. It's just the nature of flour. So this is 2.5 cups. And all I'm doing is scooping it and scraping it off so that it's even on top. Now, the next thing we want to do is add a teaspoon of sugar. The problem with adding sugar is sugar absorbs water. As long as you're not going to do something that's going to leave it sitting for a while, it's okay. But if not, the crust will suck up the water and the crust will become a little wetter than you probably want it to. And we're also going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Now I'm going to mix all those things together, whisk them a little bit. Now, I've been making pie crusts off and on for a long time, and I've had varying results. Just lately, after a lot of research and watching a whole bunch of people make pies, I've come across a mixture that I'm comfortable with that uses several different people's strategy. I'll leave the links to different strategies. But the fact is, there's a lot of different ways of making pie crusts. Now, this is unsalted butter that I have cut into cubes. Interestingly, I like biscuits a lot, and this is similar to a technique, very similar to making biscuits. All of it is, but one of the unique things about this is it uses a folding method, which I've seen a couple people do, which I really like. And that's very similar to doing folding when you're making biscuits to give them layers. The folding technique in this is designed to give you layers in your pie crust, which turn out to really make a very nice pie crust. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just dump it all in, and then I'm going to go from there. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get all these little cubes covered in flour. That's 1 cup of butter and 2.5 cups of flour. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and start squeezing these. Now, a lot of this you could certainly do in a machine. You could do it in a mixer or in a food processor, but I'm going to do it manually. I like the feel of the butter when you crush it in your fingers. Now, it's real important you keep the butter cold. So if your hands are hot and the butter starts getting too warm, put it in the refrigerator for a while and let it cool off, or put it in the freezer for a few minutes, whichever works best for you. But the first thing we're going to do is just start squishing these little cubes and making sure they're covered with flour. So if you look at this, this is a lot like making biscuits, because you put the butter in the flour and you squeeze it and trying to make sure it gets covered. So this takes a few minutes of work to get this done. It's fun to feel the pie dough, to get your hands into it. You want to really enjoy this. If you got any frustration, this will help you get rid of it. We're just squeezing these little pieces and trying to make sure they get covered in flour. After this, we're going to break these pieces down smaller and smaller. Now, the kind of pie crust I'm going to make is a lot like making biscuits, but instead of getting the butter pieces small, it's more like a croissant where you've got a solid piece of butter in it. These are smaller pieces, but it has that feel of layering with the butter like you're doing a croissant. And as the butter expands when you cook it, it's going to give you that nice layering in the dough, which both tastes good and looks pretty good. It browns nicely. It gives you something other than that soft, doughy crust that a lot of pies have. This gives you a really nice feeling pie crust, crunchy, even on the bottom if you cook it right. Now you could do half of a recipe. This is for 2, and one would go a little quicker, but you just use half the ingredients. Everything else works the same. So I'm just going through here and just pulling this, making sure everything gets coated, and breaking up these big pieces into smaller pieces just by taking them and smushing them. We don't want to get them too small. Now, some pie crust recipes your objective is to get the pieces so small, you get them, it's like peas in the flour. That works too, and that's fine, but that's not going to give you the kind of crust that I think you're going to want. It'll give you a very nice crust, but it won't give you the layering that I think you probably would prefer. You can certainly do that. It'll be a fine crust. And again, different crusts for different things. This is a nice general crust for most anything you like that you want to have a kind of a crunchy crust. Food processors you could use a food processor or a mixer to do this, but the problem is it'll make the butter too small probably, because you really want some decent sized pieces, about the sizes of half of a pecan. You want it about that size. You just want to keep working them, make sure they're covered, make sure you got all the big pieces broken up into smaller pieces and covered in flour. The color of the flour is starting to change to be a little more beige. I think that's probably it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some water in it. Now, this calls for 6 tablespoons of water, and that's probably right. I'm going to just pour a little in the middle and get started with that. Generally, whatever amount they ask for, you're going to add more. The objective here is to get all this mixed together and get the flour to come together, kind of like when you're making biscuits, you want it to come together. And it's going to take a little more water. I like to take it and do it like this. I've seen people do it lots of different ways, but I like using my hands in it. I feel like I'm getting better results. We'll try a little more water. Oh, now I spilled a piece of ice in it. Don't let a piece of ice get in it. You'll end up with a lump somewhere in your dough because it'll melt and it'll be too wet in that spot. All right. It's like I'm kneading this. I'm really not trying to develop gluten. I'm just trying to get the flour and the water to come together. See how it looks ragged? That's getting close. I'm going to take this piece out so this looks like it's about ready. And I'm going to take this piece out. It looks like it's about ready. Add a little more water. That feels pretty good. I don't want to leave any flour on the bottom. I'm trying to get it to mix well enough that I get all the flour. I don't want it so wet that it's sticky, but I want it to pick up all the flour. Okay, let's get the rest of this back in here. Get it to come together. All right, now I'm going to get the dough off my fingers. I'm going to bring it, put it all in here. I'm going to dump the rest of this in here. And I'm going to try and bring it together. You want it to be a little ragged still. You want it to be a little cracky still. But you don't want it to be so wet that when you touch it, it sticks to your hand. So that's pretty good. Now, if I work it too much more, I'm going to melt the butter, and then I'm going to have a different problem. So the next thing I want to do is cut it into 2 pieces. And from there, we're going to wrap it up and put it in the refrigerator and then roll it in a couple days. So, let's cut it. I'll try and get it about even. Let's say that's about half. Close. I'm not going to go so far as measuring it, but it's pretty close. Now I have discovered that if it's too wet, when you go to roll it, you put a little flour down. If it's too dry, you can get your hands wet and work it with wet hands, and that kind of offsets that. So I wouldn't worry too much about whether it's too wet or too dry. It's better if it's not too dry, because it then tends to fall apart. But if you feel like it's a little too dry, but just a little bit, get your hands wet and work it with wet hands, and you'll see it come together. So we've got 2 little nice little rolls there. They're a little cracked, which is good. That means it's not too wet. They're not really sticky. They're just right, I think. Although I wonder if pie dough, it's ever perfect, unless you're one of those people who makes 100 pies a day, and I bet those people get it right every time. But I don't do that. I make a pie 2 or 3 times a year. The next step is to wrap it in plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. So I'm going to start with this one. And I'm going to okay, there's the first one, wrapped nicely. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, and then I'm going to do it with the second one. Now, you can do a pie with this in about an hour, but it'd be better if you'd give it a little more time so that the flour can continue mixing with the water, get more hydrated. That will make your dough better. Plus it gets the butter together. But the butter, if you notice, I don't know if you can see it. When we go to roll it, you'll see it. The butter's still in chunks. That's going to help make the layers. So that goes in the refrigerator for at least an hour. The dough has been in the refrigerator cooling for about 24 hours. So I'm going to try and roll it out. Now, I'll be honest with you, I am not the best at doing this. I'll put some links in of people who do it great, although I expect the difference is they've done it a million times and I don't do it that often. But a couple of things that I do think I have learned about doing it, I would like to share. Now, first thing, put a little flour out. You don't want too much flour because you don't want to really get this, you don't want to add much flour to this if it's ready. But sometimes if it's a little sticky, a little flour will help. Now, if you look closely, you'll see there's butter. This dough makes a pie crust that we're going to treat like we would a biscuit. We're going to fold it. Now, I've seen a few people doing that, and one of the links I'll put in there will be somebody who does that a lot. And I think it's a really good idea. I think folding the dough is just like folding a biscuit. It really gives you more layers. So I think turns out that's a pretty good idea. This dough is pretty cold. Now the good thing about it being rested is that it tends to roll a little easier. The bad thing about it being cold is it doesn't roll real easy. Now if you have butter on the edges, you just want to take it out and put it in the middle so that it'll merge back into it as we roll it. And it's real raggedy, you can tell that from what I'm doing, but that'll get better as I go through it. And I'm going to turn it over, get some of that. Now it turns out from the look of this looks like it might be a little too dry. And the way I would fix that would be make my hands wet, but I'm not quite ready to do that. It could be that it's just really cold. I don't see any dryness in it. It just looks like it's mostly stiff from being cold. So all I'm doing is turning it over and trying to roll it flat. Now this is a kind of a cheater because it has a little rim there to help me. But being that I'm not that good at rolling, that helps. And I just turn it a quarter turn. And roll it a little bit more. Trying to get it about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now, okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it like this. I'm going to take it like that, brush off that, and then I'm going to try and round it out again. Since I would like to have a somewhat round crust, I'm just going to take it and kind of turn it in and try and get it to be a little bit round again. And then I'm going to do some more roll. I'm going to turn it. A little more flour under here so it won't stick. Now I'm going to do this fold twice to try and get it fairly even. But if you notice, it's just like with biscuits. As you work them a little bit, they become a little easier. You don't want to overwork it, but as you do it, the dough becomes smoother, just like when you're working with bread. It just gets a little smoother as you work with the dough. I'm sure it has something to do with the water getting into the flour and the butter getting into the flour. It just makes it a smoother dough. As you can tell, like I said, I'm not great at this. But the good thing about folding this is it seems to get a little bit better with each fold. And what that fold will do is put layers in as it cooks, and it'll make the crust nice and layered. It will be not only tasty, but it will look really pretty. Now, if it gets that where you're having too much trouble working this, you can stick it back in the refrigerator for a few minutes. But I think it's coming along right now. Now this same crust could be used for all sorts of things, not just pies, or you could make galettes, which I guess is another form of pie that doesn't have without having a pan around it. You could make little hand pies with it. It's just a really good overall butter crust. It really tastes good. That's the main thing. It's a very tasty crust. And I don't know if that matters to everybody, but it really matters to me. I think the reason I avoided this kind of crust for so long is because I just didn't think they tasted good. But this one really does taste good. I'm going to put a little more flour out just to help it a little bit. Again, I'm not trying to add too much flour to it, but I just want it to be easy to work. I'm always impressed with the people who can roll this in one pass and just have a beautiful round piece of dough. I can't do that. I think it's the same way with the pizza. Now, as the dough gets If it starts shrinking when you roll it, you need to let it rest for a little while. Put it back in the refrigerator, because that's the gluten bonds, I believe, tightening it back up. But if you notice how different it is, how flat it is, how smooth it is now that we've rolled it a couple times and have folded a couple times. So now we have a really nice, smooth crust. It's not big as I'd like yet, and it's still not as thin as I would like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little flour under here, turn it over, roll it this way. It's coming along really nicely. Yeah, it's shrinking back. That's the gluten bonds, I believe, in the tightening it back up. Now, let's take a look at this relative to the pan. Since I'm going to push this down, I've got to have about 2 inches on all the way around, so it's not quite big enough, but it's getting closer. Let's see how we're doing now. We're getting there. As this is still rolling out, I obviously have not reached the point where my guides are completely down, but let's take a look. That looks pretty good. Let's see, we need a little, let's see, we need a little on that side, a little on this side. And it's shrinking back. Okay, now, I'm going to take it now and put it on the pan. This is very resilient dough. And what you want to do is try and get it as even as you can, and then press it in as well as you can. So nice. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it. I'm not going to try and make a perfect crust. I'm just going to turn it back in like that, in and under. Some places it's a little short, but it's close enough. It's going to be fine. As you can see, we got a little too much on that side. I'm just going to try and make sure I've got it in as well as I can. I don't see any breaks in it. That's good. All right. So now we have a basic crust. Now, I may not have had quite enough in that lump of pie dough to get what I wanted, but that's still not too bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just put a side on it. Now there's lots of different sides. You can do the traditional one like this. All the way around. That's a good one. It's pretty crust. You can tell it's getting a little warm because it's getting a little too sticky. It's a good time for me to put it in the refrigerator again. And if you don't like that one, you can just go like this. There's all different kinds of ways you can do this. If you have a little extra dough on top, it makes it a lot easier. But like I said, I am not I do not claim to be an expert at making pie dough, but I'm good enough to make a pie dough that I can use. And I think that's what everybody wants to do. Now the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and dock it, which is putting little holes in it so that when I bake it, which I'm not going to do for a while, the air, it won't puff up. I'm also going to put pie weights in it to help it keep from rising, but that'll let the steam out so that it won't come up in the middle. Now, I'm going to put that in the freezer rather than the refrigerator and let it sit before I par-bake it. So that's the pie crust. Okay, this is the pie crust. It's been in the freezer for several hours. So I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper over it and push it down into it. I'm trying to protect the edges, and I'm going to fill it up with a mixture of beans and things that I use. If you have something fancier than that, go ahead and use it. I just use what I have. Had some beans that hadn't been used in a long time, so I just started using them as pie weights. Now, I usually try and put more on the sides, help hold the sides down, but that's pretty much it. I'm going to stick this in a 425-degree oven for 15 minutes, right from the freezer. It's been about 20 minutes. I let it stand a little bit longer because it wasn't really browning as much as I would like. We'll pull those out. If you'll notice, still a little wet, but starting to brown. I'm going to put it back in the oven for 20 or 25 minutes at 350 degrees. I'm sorry, at 325 degrees. And here we have a par-baked crust ready for a pie filling. And so I'm going to put this aside and make a pie later to go with it. But that's pretty easy, except rolling is a pain. And you have to practice, and I'm still not good at it, but it's good enough. That's going to make a great pie. So, hope you enjoy it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give us a like. Thank you.